Last weekend, the United States crossed a line. Quietly, decisively, its military moved into Venezuela. That single action set off a chain reaction, not overseas, but here in Washington. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and when war begins, money often follows. Within days, House Democrats opened an investigation, not into troop movements, but into profit. They are asking a blunt question. Who benefits from this war? 4 oil giants are now under scrutiny. Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Continental Resources. These companies were summoned as the White House prepared to meet oil executives behind closed doors. Was this about national security, or was it about oil, control, extraction, and power? This concern is not partisan. Even Republicans are uneasy. The Senate is pushing back. If you want to understand how modern power truly operates, keep watching. Because Venezuela is only the surface. To understand what's really happening, we must first define the problem clearly. What exactly is the problem we are looking at? At first glance, it seems simple. A U.S. military action, a collapsing country, a promise to rebuild, but beneath that surface is something far more complex. The United States did not just intervene in Venezuela. It intervened in the world's largest proven oil reserves. That fact changes everything. President Trump has said the U.S. could be running Venezuela, extracting its oil. For years, yet lawmakers were not informed in advance. Plans were not clearly explained. Funding mechanisms remain vague. So Congress is asking basic questions. Who controls the oil? Who rebuilds the infrastructure? Who sells it to the market? And most importantly, who gets paid? This is where suspicion enters. When military power aligns with private capital, oversight becomes essential. Without it, foreign policy risks turning into a business plan. To understand how we reach this moment, we need to look backward at history, at cycles, at how oil has shaped power before. To understand this moment, we have to go back. Not to last year, not even to the last decade, but to the long history of oil and power. Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in Latin America. Its wealth came from one place, oil. For decades, oil funded the state. It paid for food, for subsidies, for political loyalty, but oil also created dependency. When prices were high, the system survived. When prices fell, it cracked. Mismanagement followed, corruption deepened, infrastructure decayed, production collapsed, refineries broke down, skilled workers fled. By the time the U.S. intervened, Venezuela's oil system was already hollow. That matters because rebuilding oil infrastructure is not like flipping a switch. It takes money, technology, and control. And historically, when great powers step in during collapse, they rarely leave empty-handed. This is not new. It is a cycle. And cycles tend to accelerate toward crisis. That brings us to the first breaking point. The first crisis came fast, and it caught Washington off guard. After the incursion, confusion spread through Congress, not outrage. Confusion. Lawmakers attended classified briefings. They asked direct questions, and they did not get clear answers. How would Venezuela's oil system be rebuilt? Who would run it? Who would fund it? And who would control the money? Even Republicans raised concerns. One lawmaker asked where the funding would go, who would oversee it, and who would ultimately benefit. At the same time, the Senate made a rare move. It advanced a war powers resolution. 5 Republicans crossed party lines. That is not symbolic. That is a warning. It signaled something deeper, a fear that executive power was moving too fast. Without transparency, without consent, if this were only about security, the answers would be simple. But they were not, and when answers are missing, suspicion grows. If this analysis helps you see the story beneath the headlines, stay with me. because the real mechanism is still hidden. And that is where we turn next. Here is what sits beneath the surface. The real story is not the military action. It is the system around it. Foreign policy does not operate in isolation. It moves through incentives, through money, through access. Oil is not just a resource. It is leverage. Rebuilding Venezuela's oil infrastructure would require massive investment. Trump has said at least $100 billion. That money does not come from governments alone. It comes from private companies, from investors, from firms that expect returns. And this is where the mechanism tightens. Oil companies receive regulatory relief, tax advantages, political access. In return, they gain opportunity, access to reserves, control over extraction, influence over markets. When military force clears the path, capital follows. This does not require conspiracy, only alignment. The concern in Congress is not that oil companies exist. It is that oversight may disappear when power concentrates too quickly. Because once control shifts, reversing it becomes almost impossible. And when systems lock into place, the consequences arrive suddenly. That sets the stage for the second crisis. The second crisis was quieter, but far more dangerous. While lawmakers debated authority, another conversation was happening behind closed doors. Oil executives gathered at the White House, not after the decision, but during it. At the same time, senators requested records, emails, meetings, promises. They wanted to know who had spoken to whom, and about what. One name stood out: Paul Singer, a powerful investor, a major political donor, and the man behind a firm tied to Citgo, Venezuela's most valuable foreign oil asset. Lawmakers asked whether there were communications, whether influence flowed through private channels, whether financial interests shaped public decisions. This is the danger zone, because when private capital gains early access, it shapes outcomes before the public ever sees them. No laws need to be broken. No orders need to be written. Influence alone is enough. And by the time the public asks questions, the architecture is already built. Now, the consequences move closer to home. Now, let me bring this back to you, because systems do not collapse in theory. They collapse in real lives. When governments act without clarity, uncertainty spreads. Markets react, prices move, jobs shift. You feel it before you understand it. Higher energy costs do not stay on trading screens. They show up at the gas pump, on your utility bill, in the cost of food. Foreign interventions reshape priorities at home. Money flows outward. Attention follows power. And ordinary citizens are left reacting. You are not voting on these decisions. You are not in those rooms, yet you live with the consequences. That distance creates frustration and mistrust. If you've ever felt that global politics happens to you, not with you, this is why. Because when accountability fades, impact becomes personal. If this perspective resonates, share it. These conversations matter more than ever. And this story does not stop at America's borders. What happens next does not stay contained. Venezuela is not just a country, it is a node. Its oil touches global markets. Its collapse sends signals across continents. When the United States intervenes, others watch closely. Allies, rivals, energy producers. Prices adjust in anticipation. Supply chains recalibrate. Diplomacy hardens. For countries dependent on oil imports, uncertainty becomes risk. For producers, it becomes leverage. And for rivals, it becomes opportunity. If the US normalizes military-backed resource control, the precedent travels fast. Other powers will follow. With fewer rules, with less scrutiny, this is how geopolitical norms erode. Not through one decision, but through repetition. What began as a domestic controversy now reshapes the global order. Quietly, incrementally, And once the world adapts to a new rule book, returning to the old one is nearly impossible. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. The future now branches in three directions. The first is the optimistic path. Oversight holds. Congress asserts authority. Transparency slows the rush of power. Investment becomes regulated. And Venezuela's oil is rebuilt with clear rules and limits. In this scenario, force gives way to institutions, and institutions restore balance. The second path is muddled. Investigations drag on. Answers come late. Deals are partially disclosed. Control is shared but unevenly. Here, nothing fully breaks, but nothing truly heals. Power drifts. Trust erodes. This is the most common outcome in modern politics. The third path is the darkest. Oversight fails. Precedent hardens. Military action becomes an opening move for extraction. In this world, foreign policy is no longer guided by norms. It is guided by opportunity. History tells us something uncomfortable. Systems rarely choose the best path on their own. They follow incentives. And unless those incentives are confronted, the future chooses for us, which is why how this ends matters more than how it began. Let me close with that. The story is not really about Venezuela, and it is not only about oil. It is about how power is exercised in the modern world. When military force, private capital, and political loyalty align, decisions accelerate. Oversight lags behind, and accountability becomes an afterthought. History shows us this pattern again and again, not in dramatic collapses, but in quiet shifts. One exception becomes a rule. One shortcut becomes standard practice. And suddenly, the system feels unfamiliar, harder to question, harder to slow down. The question is not whether this intervention was justified. The deeper question is whether democratic control can still keep up with concentrated power. That answer is still being written, and it depends on attention, on pressure, on whether citizens choose to look closely or look away. If this analysis helped you see the structure behind the headlines, stay with me. Share this conversation and continue asking uncomfortable questions, because the future of power is not decided in one moment. It is decided in how closely we watch the next one.